aunt sold her to a disabled Korean man on their wedding night. She discovered he runs the Mafia. The sheets were cold silk against Adaeze's skin, the color of moonlight, the temperature of a warning. She had been sitting at the edge of the bed for 11 minutes, she had counted, listening to the sound of the penthouse breathe around her, the low mechanical hum of a building that cost more than most countries' debt, when she heard it. Not footsteps, not a knock. The quiet, deliberate click of a door, being unlocked from the inside of a room she had been told, twice, did not exist. And through the gap in that impossible door, in the blue dark of a Seoul midnight, she saw something that rewrote every sentence she had told herself about the man she had married 6 hours ago. He was not disabled. He was not even entirely human, not in the way she understood the word. And the 30 men standing in formation around him, heads bowed, hands clasped, were not his staff. They were his army. 3 months before that night, Adaeze Okafor was 23 years old and already an expert in the art of surviving small cruelties. She was tall, with a kind of dark, luminous skin that caught light the way still water does, holding it, deepening it, giving it back richer than it came. Her hair was locked and pinned at the crown with a clip her mother had bought her the year before she died, small and gold and shaped like a bird mid-flight. Her jaw was strong, her eyes the particular shade of brown that reads as black in photographs and as something closer to amber when the sun hit them directly. She was the kind of beautiful that people noticed and then immediately tried to find a reason to dismiss, because beauty without backing made people uncomfortable, and Adaeze had no backing. She had her aunt's spare room. She had the job at the medical records office that her aunt had arranged, and from which her aunt collected 40% of every paycheck for what she called household contributions. She had a second-hand nursing textbook she read by flashlight when the main electricity was cut, and a journal she kept locked in a box beneath a loose floorboard, because privacy, in that house, was a resource as finite as clean water. Her Aunt Blessing was not a monster. That was the most insidious thing about her. She was a woman who had looked at her dead sister's child and seen a liability first, an asset second, and a human being somewhere distant and theoretical. She owed money, real money, the kind with consequences to people who were beginning to run out of patience. And one morning in October, she looked across the breakfast table at Adaeze, who was studying drug interaction charts on her phone before her shift, and made a calculation. That afternoon, Adaeze came home to find her aunt seated in the good chair in the sitting room, the one reserved for guests, with her hands folded in her lap and a look on her face that Adaeze had never seen before. Not guilt, something smaller and more careful than guilt. Relief. She set down her bag. She did not sit. "There is something," her aunt said, "that has been arranged." The word arranged did a great deal of work in Blessing Okafor's vocabulary. She said it the way people say adjusted when they mean destroyed, or passed on when they mean abandoned. It was a word that smoothed over the shape of things so you couldn't feel the edges until you were already bleeding. She explained it in under 4 minutes. A Korean business family. Old money, she said, though the way she said it suggested she was repeating something she'd been told rather than something she understood. A son-only son, she emphasized, as if this were a selling point. Some kind of injury, she said vaguely, waving her hand. Nothing severe. He needed a wife. A real wife, she clarified. Not a social arrangement, a legal union. In exchange for Adaeze, Blessing's debt, $430,000 borrowed across 3 years from a man named Mr. Choi, whose representatives had recently begun appearing outside her workplace, would be dissolved. Completely, permanently. "You'll be taken care of," her aunt said. "Better than I could ever manage. Better than you'd manage on your own." Adaeze stood very still. The sitting room smelled of the candles her aunt burned to impress guests, synthetic vanilla, cloying and thick, and outside, a neighbor's radio played something with too much bass. She felt the specific, practiced calm she had cultivated since she was 9 years old to descend over her like a second skin. She had learned that stillness was the only weapon available to a woman with no other resources. She had learned to be very, very still. "When," she said, "did you first speak to them?" Her aunt blinked. She had expected tears, perhaps, or arguments she had already prepared answers for. The precision of the question threw her. "What?" "The Korean family. When did you first make contact with them? Before or after Mr. Choi's men came to your office last month?" The silence that followed lasted exactly long enough to be an answer. Adaeze nodded. She picked up her bag. She went to her room, the spare room, 8 feet by 10, with the window that wouldn't fully close, and she sat on the edge of the bed and opened the box under the floorboard. She took out her journal, which contained 7 years of her own thinking, her own dreaming, her own record of herself. She held it in both hands, its spine worn soft as skin. She did not cry. She was past the age where crying felt like it accomplished anything. She was being sold. The word her aunt hadn't used, the word that sat beneath, arranged like a bone beneath thin skin. But the journal was hers. The bird clip was hers. The mind that had just disassembled her aunt's entire timeline in under 30 seconds, that was hers. They could arrange her body. They had never touched anything else. They brought her to a restaurant that wasn't listed anywhere online. It occupied the top floor of a building in Victoria Island that presented itself to the street as an architectural firm, subtle signage, dark glass, nothing to suggest that above the drafting tables and mood-lit reception desks, there existed a dining room with 12 tables, 11 of which were always empty, and one that was always, irrevocably, his. A woman in a gray suit, no introduction given, had collected Adaeze from her aunt's house that morning in a car that smelled of cedar and leather and complete, immovable wealth. She had been given 45 minutes to pack whatever she was taking. She had taken the journal, the bird clip, the nursing textbook, 3 changes of clothes, and her mother's photograph. Everything else she left without ceremony. The elevator opened directly into the dining room, and Adaeze, who had prepared herself for many things, had not prepared herself for the quality of the silence. He was already seated. His back was straight in a way that cost effort. She registered that immediately. The practiced nature of his posture, the way stillness can be a form of work. He was broad across the shoulders, his suit the color of graphite, his hair black and cut with the precision of someone who understood that appearance was a form of armor. He was perhaps 35, perhaps older. His face was the kind that was difficult to read, not because it was blank, but because it was too controlled. Every feature arranged into a deliberate neutrality that had required, she suspected, years of practice. The cane was beside the table, dark wood, silver handle, leaning at an angle that suggested it had been placed, not dropped. He looked up when she entered, and that was the moment. That was the specific, suspended moment she would return to later in the quiet of the penthouse, when she was trying to construct an honest account of how she had ended up here. He did not look at her the way men looked at women they had purchased. There was none of the inventory of it, none of the slow assessment she had braced against. He looked at her the way she imagined a cartographer might look at a coastline that had appeared on no existing map, with an attention that was almost impersonal in its intensity, like he was trying to understand something rather than acquire it. She sat across from him without being invited to. The gray suit woman disappeared. For 4 minutes, he said nothing. The restaurant was cool and dim, the air carrying the faint green scent of real plants in indirect light, and somewhere below them, the city was noise and heat and chaos. And in here, there was only the sound of her own measured breathing and his. He reached across the table, not toward her, but to the small ceramic dish at the table's center, and moved it 2 inches to the left. It was such a small gesture, such a precise, domestic, almost unconscious adjustment of his immediate world. She felt something loosen in her chest that she immediately tightened back. When he finally spoke, it was not a question, not a greeting, not an apology. He said, "You read people faster than you want them to know." and then he picked up the menu. The ceremony was held on a Wednesday, in a room on the 14th floor of a government building that smelled of recycled air and photocopier, toner, and the particular cold that comes from powerful air conditioning in a space no one loves. Adaeze had chosen her own dress. This had not been offered. She had simply stated to the gray suit woman, whose name she'd learned was Director Han, that she would be wearing something of her own choosing, and the flatness of her tone had apparently communicated that this was not a point of negotiation. They had given her a car and a card with a number on it that turned out to have no visible limit. She had bought ivory, not white ivory, which was warmer, which was closer to the color of old paper and new beginnings. It was simple, structured at the shoulder, falling straight to the floor. She wore her locks down for the first time in months, and the bird clip held back one side just above her ear. She had not done this for him. She had done it because she was 23 years old, and it was her wedding day, and she was determined to be the author of at least this one detail. He was waiting at the front of the room in a suit so dark it was nearly black, the cane held loose in his left hand, his eyes forward. 2 witnesses stood on either side, people she did not know, people she would never know. Her aunt was not there. Adaeze had not invited her. The registrar spoke. Standard words, the legal minimum, the bureaucratic skeleton of a union. And Adaeze said her part. She said it clearly, without hesitation, because hesitation was a luxury she had never been able to afford. And then it was his turn, and she looked at him. She had not intended to look at him. She had intended to look at the middle distance, the practiced gaze of someone enduring a formal process. But something, the quality of his stillness, perhaps, the way he had gone even more still as the registrar reached his portion, pulled her eyes to his face. He was already looking at her, not at the registrar, not at his hands, at her. And the room, the cold, utilitarian, fluorescent-lit room contracted. The witnesses disappeared. The registrar's voice became something abstract and distant, like music in another building. There was only the 14 inches between her face and his, and the thing happening in that space that neither of them had words for because neither of them had encountered it before. He said his vows. He said them to her face, every word direct, every word deliberate, every word landing in her chest like a stone in still water. The registrar said, "I now pronounce you," and it was done. He did not reach for her hand. He did not smile. He looked at her for one more moment with that cartographer's gaze, and then he turned, and the cane clicked once against the tile floor, and they walked out into a life that neither of them had chosen and both of them had entered anyway. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building in Ikoyi, and it was the most beautiful trap Adaeze had ever seen. She had been in beautiful spaces before the hospital, where she did her placement hours, had a donor wing with marble floors and fresh flowers daily, but this was different. This was not beautiful for an audience. This was beautiful in the way that a private thing is beautiful, a thing made with complete disregard for whether anyone else would ever see it. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the night city spread below like a circuit board of amber and white light. Floors the color of dark honey, walls the color of fog. Art that she couldn't name, but that made something in her sternum ache when she looked at it too long. Director Han showed her to a wing on the east side of the building, her wing, apparently, with its own kitchen and sitting room, and a bedroom so large the bed seemed like a boat floating in the center of a calm sea. He did not come. She waited, without meaning to wait, for 2 hours. Then she stopped waiting and began to explore. She touched everything, not with greed, with the focused attention of a woman cataloging her new coordinates. The countertops, cool and seamless. The spines of the books on the shelves in her sitting room, all of them in English, she noticed, which was a detail someone had considered. The fabric of the curtains, heavy and textured, and the color of midnight blue. She was not intimidated. She was mapping. It was on her third circuit of the main corridor connecting her wing to the shared living spaces that she found it. A hallway that ended in a wall. Not a door, a wall, except the baseboards continued past it, and the electrical conduit overhead curved left rather than terminating. And when she stood close enough, she could feel barely the whisper of conditioned air from the other side. Mrs. Shin, one of the staff, a young woman, eyes careful, appeared behind her. "Dinner has been prepared in your dining room. What's through there?" Adaeze asked. Conversationally, pleasantly. "There is nothing through there, ma'am." The young woman's eyes were very steady, the steadiness of someone who had been coached. Adaeze looked at the wall for one more moment. Then she smiled and followed the young woman to dinner. She was eating alone, the city glittering 40 floors below her, when the knock came, soft, deliberate. She opened the door to find a woman she had never seen older, immovable as architecture, wearing a charcoal dress, who set an ivory envelope on the table by the door, without a word, without a change of expression, and turned and was gone before Adaeze could form a question. The envelope had her name on it, her full name, written in handwriting that was small, even, and absolutely controlled. She opened it slowly, the way she opened anything that came without explanation. The paper inside was thick and cream-colored, and the list was numbered, 12 items. She read it 3 times. "You may move freely throughout the residence and all common areas. The east corridor past the third junction is not accessible to you at this time. This is not a restriction. It is a precaution. You are not to speak directly with the following staff members regarding the nature of my work or my schedule." 3 names followed, which she memorized immediately. "If my phone rings in a room where you are present, please leave the room. Do not answer it under any circumstance. Do not tell anyone you have heard it ring. Your accounts have been established. There is no spending limit. There is no reporting requirement. What you spend is your business. If at any point you feel unsafe, press the white button on the underside of your bedside table. Do not use your phone first. Press the button first. Do not open the door to anyone who has not been announced by Director Han, regardless of what they tell you about who they are." She set the paper down on her lap. A man who wanted to control her would have written different rules. He would have told her where she could go and given her a curfew and restricted her communication. He would have made the cage visible, because a visible cage is also a demonstration of power. These rules were not a cage. They were a perimeter. And there was a difference, a significant, deliberate difference, between a fence that kept her in and a fence that kept something else out. She picked up the paper again and read the last item. "You do not owe me conversation, company, or warmth. You owe me nothing that was not freely given. I am aware of the terms of your arrival here, and I want you to know that I consider them to be the beginning of a debt mine, not yours." It was unsigned. She folded the paper with great care and placed it in the box with her journal. She sat in the beautiful, quiet room for a long time, turning the word precaution over in her mind the way you turn a stone over to see what lives beneath it. Before we find out what's behind that locked door, and I promise you, nothing will prepare you for what's on the other side. Make sure you've hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below and tell us, do you think Adaeze should open that door? Because what's inside is about to change everything. Now, let's continue. 10 days into the marriage, he found her in his library at 11 o'clock at night. She had discovered it on day 4, a room that shouldn't exist in the floor plan she had mentally constructed, accessed through a door disguised as a section of paneling near the shared kitchen. She had been visiting it every night since, taking a book, returning it the next morning, leaving no trace of herself except that the books were always replaced exactly as she found them, which was itself a kind of trace. She was reading about the history of the Korean underworld, a book in English, academic, dense, with footnotes, when she heard the door. He stopped in the doorway. She did not look up immediately, which was deliberate. She finished the paragraph. Then she looked up. He was in different clothes than she had ever seen him, dark trousers, a simple shirt, his feet bare, the cane in his left hand. The absence of the jacket made him look simultaneously more human and more dangerous. She was aware of how still the building was at this hour, how completely they were alone. "That book," he said, "has 3 factual errors in the first chapter." "I know," she said. "I've marked them." He looked at the small pencil marks in the margin. She had borrowed a pencil from his desk, left it in the cup where she'd found it, and something crossed his face too quickly for her to name. He sat, not beside her, across from her, in the chair that faced the window, so that the city was behind him, and his face was in shadow, and she was in light. Another controlled choice. "Why that book?" he asked. "Because it was the most honest one on the shelf," she said. "The others were written by people who were either too close to the subject or too frightened of it. This one was written by someone who didn't understand it well enough to be frightened. There's a clarity in that." He said nothing for a moment. The library smelled of old paper and the cedar oil used to condition the shelves, a smell that was serious and private and nothing like her aunt's synthetic vanilla. "You're studying me," he said. It was not an accusation. "You studied me first," she replied. "In the restaurant, I'd like to understand what you saw." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people deciding simultaneously how honest to be. "I saw," he said slowly, "someone who had learned to hold very still so that no one would notice how fast she was moving." Adaeze felt the words land somewhere specific and internal, somewhere she didn't usually allow visitors. She kept her face even. "Why did you agree to this?" he asked then. And she understood from the slight change in his register, the way the question came out a half-degree less controlled than everything prior, that he had not planned to ask it. "You could have refused, run, something." She looked at him. She told him the truth. "My mother used to say that a woman who has nothing has the most freedom," she said, "because she has nothing left to protect. I had nothing left to protect. So I walked in." He looked at her for a long time. Then he stood. The cane found the floor. He moved toward the door. He came back the next night, and the night after that, always to the same chair, always to the silence first, and then to something that was not quite conversation and not quite anything else, but was becoming, slowly and without either of them naming it, necessary. She saw him on a Thursday morning, in the corridor outside the kitchen at 6:45, when he believed the wing was empty. She had woken early and gone for water, and stopped at the sound of something that was not quite a sound, the particular quality of a person exerting effort in a way they are trying to make silent. She stayed in the shadow of the doorway. He had set the cane against the wall. He was standing without it standing and moving, crossing the corridor, step by careful step, his hand not on the wall, but near it, hovering. The space between his palm and the plaster, the physical measurement of his pride, his jaw, was set. His breathing was controlled and deliberate in a way she recognized from patients she had observed during her clinical hours. People fighting their own bodies, people engaged in the private war of recovery. He reached the window at the corridor's end. He stood there for a moment, his hand finally pressing flat against the glass, the morning city below him beginning to color with early light. His shoulders dropped just slightly, just 1 degree of the armor coming loose, and he pressed his forehead briefly to the cool glass. It lasted 3 seconds. Then he straightened, retrieved the cane, and turned back the way he'd come. She was already gone. She sat on the edge of her bed in her wing and held her own hands and tried to name what was happening in her chest. It was not pity. She was clear on that pity was a form of condescension, and what she felt was the opposite of condescension. It was recognition. She knew the 6:45 corridor. She knew the ritual of doing the hard thing before anyone could witness it and make it mean something you didn't want it to mean. She had been doing it her entire life, waking before her aunt's household to study, to grieve her mother in private, to practice the stillness that kept her safe. She knew what it cost to refuse to be fragile in front of other people. She knew the specific loneliness of strength. He had been fighting that corridor for how long? Since the attack, whatever it was, months, maybe years, every morning, alone. She stayed very still with this knowledge, the way you stay still with something you are not sure you have the right to hold. And then she made a decision. Not a dramatic one. Not one she could have fully explained. She started paying attention differently. Not to the myth of him, the silence, the control, the empire implied by every surface of the penthouse, but to the man who pressed his forehead to cold glass at 6:45 in the morning because he needed 30 seconds of something real. She started watching for those 30 seconds. The vehicles arrived on a Sunday afternoon, when the city was slow and golden and the penthouse was quiet enough to hear the building breathe. She noticed the staff first. The way they changed, the slight acceleration of movement, the clipped exchanges in Korean that stopped the moment they registered her presence. The young woman from the kitchen who appeared in the hallway outside her wing and stood there with a careful expression that was trying very hard not to be afraid. She was at her window, watching the street below when she saw them. 3 black SUVs, unmarked, windows sealed. They did not park. They positioned. She knew the difference. The door to her wing opened without a knock. He was in the doorway. No jacket, no cane. This was the first time she had seen him without the cane in her presence, and the absence of it was not a vulnerability. He stood differently without it, his weight distributed with a precision that looked deliberate, that looked like something trained into a body rather than lost from it. He was larger in the doorway than she had quite understood before. His eyes were doing the same thing they did in the restaurant that cartographer scanned, but faster now, cataloging the room, checking her. "We need to move," he said. "Where?" she asked. She was already standing. "With me." She followed. The penthouse was transformed, staff moving with a speed and purpose that made the space feel like a different building, a building she hadn't been living in for 2 weeks, but had merely been allowed to visit. He led her down the main corridor, past the shared kitchen, toward the third junction she had never passed. He pressed his hand to the wall, not the part of the wall she had found, but a section 2 feet left, indistinguishable, and the panel opened. The east wing. She had imagined many things. A server room, a safe, a secondary office. She had not imagined a space this size, a room that opened into a suite of rooms, screens covering 2 full walls. Men at stations she recognized from films and from the dread knowledge part of her mind that understood what organized power looked like. Maps, communication equipment, the low, focused sound of controlled professionals doing things that did not have civilian names. Everyone in the room stood when he entered. Not scrambled to attention, stood, the way people stand for something they genuinely fear and genuinely respect in the same motion. He turned to face her. He said nothing. He let her see it, all of it. He stood with his hands at his sides and his eyes on her face and waited, because he was a man who had never been required to justify himself, and he was trying, in the only way he knew, to give her the space to receive the truth without performing the delivery of it. She looked at the room for a long time. She thought about the rules. It is not a restriction, it is a precaution. She thought about the 12 items on cream paper and what each of them had actually been protecting. She looked back at him. "How long?" she asked. 12 years, he said. She nodded. Not because she was accepting it, because she needed a moment to rearrange every wall inside her and rebuild them facing the right direction. She had known, on some level. The knowing had been living in her since the restaurant, since the gray-suited woman, since the car that smelled of cedar and power. She had known, and she had not looked directly at the knowledge, because direct knowledge requires a direct response, and she had not been ready. She was not entirely ready now, but she was Adaeze Okafor, and she had been standing in doorways her whole life, and she walked through them anyway. "Tell me," she said, "what's coming through the front?" The threat was neutralized by midnight. She did not ask how. At 1 in the morning, the east wing was quiet. The screens still lit, but the men gone, and she and Shin Jae-won, she had learned his full name from the staff, who used it like a formal title, were alone in the space that had been his secret and was now, irreversibly, also hers. He sat. He had the cane again, its silver handle catching the blue light of the screens. He looked tired, in a way that was different from the composure she was used to, not cracked, but worn. The difference between a wall and a man. My father built this, he began, without preamble. I inherited it when I was 23. I didn't choose it. I want you to know that first, because everything after it is easier to understand if you know that first. She sat across from him and listened. She did not interrupt. He told her about the families, not one family, a consortium, a structure so old it predated the word organized in organized crime. He told her about the reform he had spent 12 years attempting from the inside, the slow, dangerous work of transforming a legacy of violence into something that merely wielded power without requiring blood as its currency. He told her about the rival who had objected to this reform most strenuously, about the car in the underground garage of a Busan hotel 5 years ago, about the explosion and the specific angle at which the force had traveled through his lower spine. He told her all of this in the voice he used for everything, even controlled, almost clinical. But his left hand, resting on his knee, was not still. His fingers moved in a small private rhythm, as if counting something, or holding something, or trying to. She watched his hand and said nothing. Your aunt came to me, he said, 8 months ago. I was aware of who she was because I was already aware of who you were. Adaeze went very still. I had seen you, he said, twice, at the hospital where you did placement. I was there for something that had nothing to do with you. You were in the corridor outside the cardiology ward, arguing with a consultant about a patient's medication chart. For the first time, something moved at the edge of his mouth, not quite a smile. The memory of what a smile felt like. You were right. He was wrong. He knew you were right. You made him know it, without ever raising your voice. She breathed carefully. You didn't arrange this. Your aunt arranged it. I accepted it. He met her eyes. Those are different things. I want you to be clear on that distinction. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the question. Not about the families, not about the threat that had come through the front tonight, or the ones that would come in the future. Not about what her life would look like inside this empire, or how dangerous it would always be. She asked, what were you doing in Busan the moment before it happened? What were you doing? He looked at her. The controlled face did something she had never seen it do. It didn't crumble, it was too disciplined for that, but it opened, the way a room opens when you finally find the window. Something came through. I was on the phone with my mother, he said. She was telling me about a bird that had built a nest on her apartment balcony. She was describing the color of the eggs. The silence after this was the most specific silence she had ever sat inside. She understood then fully, finally, the shape of what she was dealing with. Not a myth, not a chairman. A man who had been talking about birds when the world broke, and who had spent 5 years rebuilding himself from the point of that fracture, every morning in the corridor at 6:45. She reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his restless left hand. He went completely still. She did not say anything, neither did he. But his fingers under hers slowly stopped their counting, and in the blue-lit quiet of the East Wing, that was enough. He told her, 3 days later, in the library, in the ordinary lamplight of their ordinary 11 o'clock, that she could leave. He said it plainly, the way he said everything, without decoration, without strategy. He laid it out like a document. The marriage could be dissolved legally within 30 days through a firm in London that handled precisely this kind of arrangement. She would receive a settlement that would fund whatever life she wanted to build. He would ensure her aunt's reach was permanently curtailed, not through violence, he said, meeting her eyes, but through legal and financial mechanisms that would make interference both impossible and unwise. She would be relocated anywhere she chose, a clean start, fully resourced, fully protected. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you deserve to choose, he said. The version of you that arrived here did not have a choice. The version of you sitting here now does. Those are different people. Different people deserve different conversations. She looked at him across the small distance of the library, the cedar and paper smell of the room, the city 40 floors below, going about its enormous, indifferent life. She thought about her aunt's sitting room and the word arranged. She thought about a childhood spent being the least important person in every room she entered, the liability, the obligation. She thought about what it had done to her, not broken her, but hollowed certain rooms inside her, the rooms where ordinary belonging was supposed to live. She thought about all of this. She let it have its full weight. And then she thought about a man on the phone with his mother, talking about the color of birds' eggs, and everything that had happened to him since that last ordinary moment, and the 12 years of deliberate, costly work to build something different from what he'd been handed, and the corridor at 6:45 in the morning, and the 12 items on cream paper, and the way he had stood in the East Wing with his hands at his sides and let her see everything without performing the offering of it. She thought about the restaurant, that first look, the cartographer's attention, something he had not expected to find beautiful. And the fact that he had kept looking every night in the library, every careful, subtext-laden exchange, every return. She thought about what it meant to be seen accurately by a person who had every reason to see you as useful rather than real. She stood up. She crossed the library. She stood in front of him, close enough that she had to look up slightly and he had to look down, close enough to hear the change in his breathing, controlled, always controlled, but not entirely. She reached up and took the bird clip from her hair, the small gold bird, mid-flight, the thing her mother had given her, the thing she had carried through every room that had tried to diminish her. She set it on the armrest of his chair. "I'm not leaving," she said, "but I need you to understand that I'm not staying because I have nowhere to go. I'm staying because I have decided to. Those are different things." She held his eyes. "You told me that distinction matters." He looked at the bird clip. He looked at her. His right hand came up, slowly, the deliberate slowness of a man who had not reached for anything in a very long time, and he picked up the clip. He turned it once in his fingers. The gold caught the lamp. Then, with the same precise care he gave to everything, he reached up and placed it in her hair. Not a kiss, not a declaration, just a man returning to a woman the thing that was hers, with his own hands, as if the act of doing it carefully was the sentence he had no other way to say. Outside, Seoul was a circuit of light. The East Wing hummed its patient hum. Somewhere, in 3 different cities, men who wanted him diminished were making their plans. But in the library, in the lamplight, at 11 o'clock, for the first time in longer than either of them could separately account for, neither of them was alone. She made her choice, and the underworld will never be the same. This is only the beginning. Because when the families in Seoul discover that the chairman of the Shin Consortium has a wife, a real one, a chosen one, a woman who looked at the full truth of his empire and decided to stay, they will send everything they have. And Adaeze Okafor, who survived on nothing for 23 years, has never been more dangerous than she is now, that she has something to protect. If you want to see what happens when the most powerful men in Asia realize that the greatest threat to their control is a woman they never bothered to account for, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel, hit that bell, and drop a comment below. What do you think she said to him when the library went dark? Tell us, because the next chapter answers that question. And it will stay with you long after it's over. Welcome to the family.